Hello class, today we're going to look at chapter 13 and it discusses corrections and multiculturalism. It's a very good chapter. We're going to go over some terminology and how different ethnicities and genders deal with corrections and how corrections deals with them. If you have any questions about this presentation, go ahead and place those on the discussion board and we will start. Okay, the book does a very good job about breaking down the organization of corrections. Basically, we have a federal system and a state system. So the federal system deals with federal crimes only. Okay, if you go to federal prison, then you are going to commit a federal crime, and that's found in the federal documents. Okay, federal documents. And the Federal Bureau of Prisons, FBOP, they're the ones that are in charge of the prison system for the federal government. When a person is released from federal prison, they go onto probation, and those people are supervised by United States probation officers. And of course, the U.S. Probation Department is also in charge of pretrial services. And there is also a federal parole commission that is in charge of all indeterminate sentences, where they have to go before the board to get released. Okay, so there's a federal system and then there's the state system. So the state runs the prisons and state parole. The counties run the jail and have county probation. So there's two different systems. So if you're in a state prison or a jail, you've committed a state crime or county crime, not a federal crime. So there's very distinct differences between the two organizations. As far as incarceration, the basic premise for a prison term is 1 year or more, and a prison is a long-term institution that houses people for long terms. There's the subculturalization and prisonization that goes on in prison. People that go to prison learn the norms and the ways of the prison structure. There's a lot of challenges and multiculturalism in prisons, as we're going to talk about in a little bit. And basically, jails are a term for 1 year or less, short-term stays, as opposed to prison, which is the long-term stay. As far as jails, so we're going to start with jails, the functions of jails. This is what jails do. This is what their purpose is, okay? So these are important to know because when we compare those to prison, they're completely different. First of all, jails hold indigents or people that cannot afford bail. Most are vagrants, it's kind of an interesting term, or a person that is homeless, or a mentally ill person. They hold pretrial detainees. Those are awaiting bail. Those have been released on their own recognizance, or those that are innocent. So jails hold pretrial detainees, those awaiting trial. Jails hold witnesses prior to trials. Those witnesses that are reluctant, that are ordered to be a witness, they're sometimes held in jail because they do not want to testify. It's rare, but it does happen. Jails also are holding convicted offenders awaiting sentencing. You're convicted yesterday of 5 counts of robbery, and your sentencing may be 3 months from now. So they're awaiting their sentencing. The one good thing about being held in jail and awaiting sentencing is that you're going to get that time back. So if you wait 6 months before you're sentenced, they're going to take that 6 months off your sentence because you basically have already been serving a sentence. Inmates serving short sentences, 1 year or less, so you can be serving a sentence in a jail. Juvenile offenders can be held in jail, usually because of fake IDs. So anybody out there that ever has a fake ID, that you're 17 and it says you're 21 because you want to vote, and you're caught for something and you go to jail instead of juvenile hall, there's some serious issues. Or depending on the seriousness of the offense, you can be held in a jail, juvenile offender. Wanted persons or detainers or warrants. Basically, somebody that's wanted from a different state or on a federal charge, or there's a warrant out for your arrest, you can be held in the jail till you're picked up by the U.S. Marshal, the FBI, or other state agencies or federal agencies. Probation and parole violators are held in jail, and it could be you're held in jail because that's going to be your sanction, 3 months in jail, or you're just awaiting the hearing. And finally, overflow from state and local jurisdictions. If one jail is overcrowded, then another jail will assist in housing inmates. So those are the functions of jails. Completely different from what a prison does. Okay. Community corrections began a long time ago, and probably the most famous person within community corrections is John Augustus, who was the world's first probation officer. And you can read about him, and he basically started probation, literally. And after 1841 in Boston, when he created probation, it spread like wildfire across the United States, and now every state has some sort of probation. And it's part of community corrections, where the person is in the community, working, learning a trade, going to counseling, and trying to return to the community a better person, not committing crimes. Probation is a conditional freedom offered by a judicial officer. So it's conditional. There's conditions of the behavior of the person needs to abide by. If they fail to abide by certain conditions, their probation can be revoked. So it's conditional, much like a driver's license. Driver's license is not mandatory, it's conditional. It can be taken away from you. So conditions of probation may involve offenders submitting to random drug tests, obeying curfews, reporting to a probation officer, or avoiding particular individuals or locations. Maybe not participating in gang activity, no gang clothing, etc., etc. So those are some of the conditions. Some of the conditions. There's a called technical violations, and these are infractions committed by those on probation or parole that are not necessarily legal, but they violate the terms of the probation or parole. So basically, failing to follow a curfew, changing one's location, failing to show up for a meeting, signing a contract, etc. Those are all technical violations that are against their conditions, and you can be held accountable, and a sanction can be given to you because of your technical violation. We talked earlier about community corrections, and we talked about probation. Parole is from a French term meaning spoken or promise, and it's different from probation. Probation starts in a jail, and a person is released, or from the court. But parole, it's an early release of a prisoner prior to completion of their sentence. So probation and parole are completely different, but they both fall under community corrections. There's several people that were responsible for the beginning of parole. 1840, Alexander McConaughey in Australia created the mark system, where if a person had enough good marks on their prison record, they could get out early. In 1842, Sir Walter Crofton in Ireland established the tickets of leave. And what happened then is that if a well-behaved prisoner earned their right to leave the prison for a day or a week and be supervised in the community, working or doing some sort of vocational training, they would then return to the prison. And if they had enough tickets of leave, they eventually were let out and did not have to return. And then finally in 1876, in New York, at Elmira Prison, Zebulon Brockway is the one that established parole here. So it wasn't until 1876 that parole was established in New York. So this is the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, General Conditions of Parole. So what you need to do with this is take a little bit of time and look at all the conditions that a person that is on parole that has been released from prison has to abide by. If they do not, they risk returning to prison. And there's just a couple of these. Oh, sorry, there's a whole bunch of them. So you need to read these and ask yourself, could you do this? And you're not even being released from prison. So again, this is some serious stuff here that a person will sign. And if these are their conditions, and if they violate any one of these, they can go back to prison. So make sure you read these and understand these. The one that I found the most often when I was a parole agent out there was usually reporting to the parole agent within 1 day of your release. A lot of those parolees, for some reason, thought they had 3 or 4 or 5 days to report. If they report late, we may just turn around and bring you right back to prison, because it says right on your conditions that you sign when you leave prison, this is what you must do. And also, not necessarily addresses, you must notify your parole agent immediately if you get arrested or get a ticket. And again, a lot of parolees did not do that. It's a kind of a minor thing, but there might be other issues involved if someone's arrested or they get a citation. So again, read these things, understand them, and this is the general conditions of parole. These are not special conditions, just general in California for all parolees. So inmates are released from prison conditionally, with conditions, or unconditionally. We'll talk about these things. Those released under conditions face community supervision for a specified time upon exiting prison. In California, the basic parole period is 3 years. So you're released from prison, you're going to be on supervised release or parole for 3 years. There's a conditional release or discretionary release. This is when a parole board grants an inmate parole. It's a conditional release because the parole board grants it, or it could be a discretionary release. So they have the discretion to release somebody, but there's going to be conditions. A mandatory release is that a person is mandatory released because they have reached their maximum. So the state cannot stop their release. It's mandatory. The unconditional release is persons that have maxed out or served their entire sentence and are released without conditions or supervision into the community. Very few people are released with no conditions, but there are certain things that can happen where a person can be released with no conditions. So we're going to just briefly look at the differences between probation and parole. You know the difference between jail, which is going to be over here with probation, and prison, which is going to be over here in parole. So we got some Sacramento County probation officers here. We have some Sacramento parole agents right over here. So these are the differences between probation and parole. Okay? Very simple stuff. Make sure you understand it. First of all, probation is a front-end sentence. It happens at the beginning. It happens when you go to court. You're convicted, you could be sentenced to probation, okay, or jail and then probation. Whereas parole is a back-end sentence. You get released at the end of your prison term onto parole. So front end, back end. Probation is up to the judge. A judge can return somebody to jail if they violate their conditions, but the Board of Parole Hearings in California can send somebody back for a parole violation. So the Board of Parole Hearings with parole, probation, it's a judge. Probation is a sentence. Parole is an early release. Probation involves felons and misdemeanors. Parole involves felons only. If you go to prison in California, you've been convicted of a felony. If you go to jail and are on probation, you can be convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor. So the next time you're at a party and your favorite Uncle Freddie, who drinks a lot, talks about how he's a convicted felon and he just got out of jail and he's on probation, that could be true. But if he says he just got out of prison, he's definitely going to be on parole, not probation. Completely different. Probation can involve jail or no jail, but parole always involves prison. Probation is run by the county, and parole is run by the state. There's state parole agents, county probation officers. County probation officers are officers of the court. State parole agents are agents of the state. So these are the differences between probation and parole. Okay, other releases are inmates can be granted clemency. Basically, the governor can grant clemency, and they can be in the form of a pardon, amnesty, a commutation, and reprieves. They can waive the punishment. It's rare, but it does happen. A pardon, California governors, the last two governors have granted many hundreds and hundreds of pardons, and basically restores the rights of a former inmate. Amnesty is similar to pardons, and this is groups of people that it involves, maybe 10 or 20 people that were committing some type of felony actions. We don't have this here in California, but it's similar to pardons in other states. Commutations, again, shortening or changing a prison sentence, and the governors have done that in a few cases. They've commuted someone's sentence from 25 years to life to 20 years. So a commutation shortens a sentence. And a reprieve is a postponement of a sentence. And basically in California, Governor Newsom has granted a reprieve to all inmates on death row because he's deemed the death row not to be something that he agrees with, so he's not going to have anybody put to death in California while he's governor. So basically, all those inmates, 740 on death row, have received a reprieve as of now. So it's delaying an execution. PREA is the Prison Rape Elimination Act passed in 2003, and basically it develops standards to prevent incidences of sexual violence in prison, including a zero tolerance policy. This is for inmates on inmate as well as staff on inmate. And it also emphasizes gathering of information. We talked about subculture earlier, and we're going to talk about this right now, about how prisoners maintain different characteristics from society when entering prison. So ultra masculinity, or an emphasis on being strong, is a priority. Those that are strong can prey on the weak. You don't want to be weak while you're in custody, or appear to be weak because you could be preyed upon. There's an inmate code which has values and norms and is developed and stressed in prison. And it encourages, again, being tough or strong, being insensitive, being manipulative, and not trusting the prison staff. There is a hierarchy of inmates. Usually the inmates that have committed the most horrendous crimes are at the top of the hierarchy. At the lowest end of the hierarchy are inmates that have snitched or told on other inmates that are informants. Just above them are ex-law enforcement officers who are imprisoned. And then just above that are anybody that has committed a rape or a child molest. Very, very low on the totem pole. The significance of jails cannot be understated. The book talks about this. So if you look at the jail system, many people pass through the jail system than prison. Critical decisions are made during jail stays, whether released on bond, whether they're going to stay, and experiences often influence behavior of inmates once they're in jail. And again, if you watch any shows on TV about jails, they can be very boring with hours of boredom and seconds of terror because there's not a lot to do in a jail. Prisons have a lot more things to do, programs, counseling, vocational things that you can do. Community corrections, we've talked about this. This book or this chapter talks about it pretty well. And again, community corrections is used to reduce prison overcrowding. So some of these practices include probation, which we talked about. It's very old, been around a long time, and it works for most. Parole, again, reduces overcrowding. Halfway houses, residential centers. Work furloughs are very good. With work furloughs, somebody can work outside the prison or jail, and for every day they work, they get a day off their sentence. So they may return to jail at night, or they may be in the community in a halfway house or a residential center. So it's a good deal all around to try to bring this person back in the community and not commit any more crimes. Correctional staff and training. There's a lot of diversity training that goes on with correctional staff. 52 hours a year, that's what the correctional officers get. And again, as correctional officer and a parole agent, I had to go through 52 hours of training per year, and classes such as PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act, weapons training, baton training, sexual harassment training, cultural diversity training, CPR. So every year you do the same classes, okay, and it keeps people aware of what their responsibilities are and what the laws are. Okay, some questions for you to review for this chapter are right here. Make sure you review these and answer these. You don't need to turn them in, but you may use them for another time, for maybe a position paper or an exam. So make sure you answer these. Again, you don't need to turn them in, but if you do have questions, go ahead and place them on the discussion board. Thank you very much. Have a great day.